Today we are going to be talking about what is probably the single most important use of Hesed in the entire Bible, because this is where God uses it to describe himself. So let's talk about it.
Welcome back to Now Let's Be Honest. We are on part 6 of our Hesed video. This is basically just videos that we're walking through pretty much every occurrence of Hesed in the Bible, from Genesis all the way through Revelation. And we're just kind of walking through them one by one.
Genesis through Malachi.
Yes.
Old Testament.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah.
Genesis through Malachi. And just kind of walking through it one by one.
Yep.
So,
Yeah, and so we're just going to hop right in. We're only covering 2 usages today, and they actually occur back to back. In Exodus chapter 34, and the reason we're slowing down for this video is because it is probably the most important use of Hesed going forward. Like, this is the one that establishes Hesed and its relationship to God, its relationship to us and everything. So we're really kind of dialing back and really just focusing in and kind of doing a more in-depth, not super in-depth, but fairly in-depth Bible study just through Exodus 33 and 34 today. So that's going to be fun. Real quick before we get started, if you want access to these slides, you can get those at nowletsbehonest.com/resources. And if you would like to become a supporter of ours on Patreon, you can do that at patreon.com/David Tate, or you can access those by clicking the links in the description down below. Other than that, could you open us up in a word of prayer, and then we will get started?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Lord, we thank you so much for being able to be here today and to talk about your word that you've revealed to us. Lord, I pray that as we go into this study, that we open our minds and we open our hearts to your wisdom that you give us, and that we can really think about what this word Hesed means, that we can take it in context and apply it in the ways that you want us to, Lord. I pray that our actions and our thoughts are glorifying to you in all that we do during this video and throughout the rest of our day. It's in your name I pray. Amen.
Amen. All right, so if you've been on this channel with us long enough, you'll know that I'm a very big context person, as I believe all Bible teachers should be. And so what I figured we would do is we just start off with a little bit of context, just to kind of get us a quick recap back to where we're at right here in Exodus chapter 34. And that involves us kind of really just recapping the story of Genesis and Exodus, because, we took a week off because last week, like our last 2 weeks have been kind of hectic. We did not get a chance to record a video. And so we took a week off. Maybe we could use a little recap. What I'm going to do is I'm going to recap the book of Genesis for us, and then I'll have you recap us basically maybe Exodus 1 through 20. So get us to Mount Sinai. Does that make sense? Okay. So book of Genesis kind of just opens up, and there's this great big God. His name is Yahweh, and he creates the heavens and the earth. He creates everything. He creates man in his own image, and he places man in a garden, and they dwell together. But the issue is that man disobeys God, and he chooses to dwell in sin and to live in sin, and so God has to kick him out of this garden. But God makes this commitment to dwell with man once again, and that is kind of the driving story of the entire Bible. Genesis through Revelation is God kind of just trying to make it his goal to dwell with man once again. He has this plan, and it's going to unfold a certain way, and that's basically the story of the Bible. And so as we go through Genesis, eventually you get to this guy named Abraham, and this is going to be the guy that God chooses to use through whom to make this plan come out and to make it play out. And so he comes to Abraham. He says, "Hey, Abraham, I'm going to make a covenant with you. What I need you to do is you need to go down to this land that I'm going to give to you. And in addition to the land, I'm also going to give you a family." Specifically, he uses the Hebrew word zerah, which means seed. I'm going to give you a seed, and through that seed, I'm going to bless the entire world. And this seems like it's a callback to Genesis chapter 3, where God says that there's going to be this seed that comes from the woman who will crush the seed that comes from the serpent being the devil or representing sin, right? And so you have this ongoing battle where you have the seed of the serpent, the seed of the woman, and apparently the seed of the woman is going to come through Abraham. And so you have this thing called the Abrahamic covenant, which God makes, which basically says you're going to get this land, you're going to get the seed, and you're going to be a blessing to people, and you will be blessed by me. Fast forward, Abraham eventually has a son named Isaac, through whom the covenant is passed. Isaac has a son named Jacob. Jacob has 12 different sons. Jacob's name is changed to Israel, and that is where we get the name the people of Israel. And these 12 sons, more or less, become the 12 tribes of Israel. And eventually what happens is they go down to a place called Egypt, which I would hope everybody hearing this video has heard of at some point, because Egypt does exist to this day, but not any shade of its former glory.
That's true.
And so they go down to Egypt, and we kind of in Genesis in this weird place where God is fulfilling things, right? You have the seed and you have the blessing, but they're not in the land. And that's kind of where Genesis ends, and you're wondering, okay, well, they need to get back to the land, and that kicks off the story of Exodus, and I'm going to hand it over to you.
Yeah. So they're in Egypt, and the Egyptians have them in slavery and bondage. So they are working for them, doing physically taxing labor. And we know that they're not in the land, so we have to figure out, okay, how are they going to get out of Egypt to this promised land that God gave them to in this covenant? So we see the story of the burning bush with Moses. Whenever God says, hey, Moses, I'm going to use you to deliver the people. And so we have these plagues that happen throughout Egypt, and it eventually ends where the firstborn dies. And so finally, Pharaoh's heart is hardening over and over again throughout the plagues. And by the time the last plague comes, the firstborn dies in all the Egyptians' households, but not the Israelites. And so Pharaoh says, hey, get out of here. And so they leave, and they go to Mount Sinai, where God comes down and this like huge cloud fire on top of the mountain and is going to reveal his glory to the Israelites.
Yeah. So basically the story of Exodus is really to go along with kind of the idea that the story of the Bible is God's commitment to dwelling with man. Exodus sees that next big step forward, because at the beginning of Exodus, you have the people of Israel living in a foreign land and they feel distant from God. The book of Exodus ends in chapter 40 with God literally coming to dwell in their midst in the tabernacle. And so we see this big step forward where God is literally doing something that hasn't been done since the Garden of Eden, right? Where God is literally coming to dwell with these people, the people of Israel. And this is all the story that gets us there. And so like you mentioned, we've got the story of the Exodus where literally the people are being taken out of bondage. And this is really the big story of the Old Testament. The New Testament hinges upon the death and resurrection of Jesus. The Old Testament hinges upon the Exodus story. Like whenever you read the rest of the Old Testament, they're constantly looking back at this story because this is the story where God reveals himself in a big and powerful way. Yeah. And that leads us to our discussion of the words Hesed in this. We discussed how it only shows up 4 times in the book of Exodus, which is weird because I believe it showed up like some 19 times or something in Genesis. Yeah. It actually dials back in Exodus, but it shows up in a much more significant ways. I also just realized that we forgot to start our timer here, and so I need to know how much time we are talking for, and so I need to see if I can get this going real quick. Oh, there it is, and here we go. I took off 5 minutes just so that we'll keep track. Okay, so we got 4 occurrences of Hesed in the book of Exodus, and we talked about 2 of them in the last video. One was in chapter 15, and that was shortly after the people passed through the Red Sea. Actually, I can just scroll through these, I guess. It's during the Song of Moses, right? They get through the Red Sea, and once they get to the other side, they are officially free people. And Moses turns to the people and he guides them in a song where eventually you get to this one part where he says that by God's Hesed, he will lead the people who he has redeemed, right? So you have this idea that God is going to govern the people according to his Hesed, and that's going to be how he leads them going forward to the promised land that he originally promised to Abraham. And then we move forward a few chapters and we got to Exodus chapter 20. This is the moment that Brianne was talking about a second ago, where God literally comes down upon Mount Sinai in like fire and smoke, and it's really crazy, like scorching the mountain. And from the mountain, he calls down to the whole assembly of Israel. And he starts giving them this thing called the law. Specifically, he voices these first things, which are called the 10 words in Hebrew, or we call them the 10 commandments, or the 10 instructions, something like that, the Decalogue. And in the midst of these, he says that God, like he describes himself, and he says that he shows Hesed to 1,000 generations, but he will visit the he will punish transgression to the 3rd and 4th generation, right? So basically what we talked about there was that when it comes to punishing sin or showing Hesed, God really prefers to show Hesed, right? He leans towards graciousness, but that doesn't minimize his righteousness. He is still a righteous God who is just. He will punish sin, but when it comes to choosing one or the other, he typically is more patient and gracious with people. And what happens at the end of Exodus 20? This is where the context is going to be really influential, because if you go back a few slides here again, you see that these last two occurrences in Exodus happen in 2 verses back to back, and they both happen in chapter 34, which is what we're covering today. And so what you need to understand is what happens in between chapters 20 and 34. And so when you're here, actually, let me go back to Exodus 20 here. This is the 10 Commandments, right? God is speaking from Mount Sinai. He is talking to the people in mass, right? He's talking to all of them. But the people are terrified, and they're scared of God. And so what they say is, Moses, you know what? How about you just go up to God, and you be a mediator between us and him? And you go up and you can get the law from him and bring it down to us. And it's kind of a heartbreaking moment, because here God is speaking to all of them, and he's wanting to dwell in their midst, and he's wanting to be their king. But they say, you know what? We're a little bit terrified of this. Moses, you go mediate between us. And so they're actually putting distance between themselves and God. Yeah. And so what happens in Exodus chapter 21 is that Moses goes up, and over the course of the next 13 chapters, he is receiving, actually not 13 chapters, over the course of the next 11 chapters, chapters 21 through 31, he is receiving the law from God. And he's actually just hearing all these different things. And as you flip through those, you're just going to see all these different laws that God is giving the people that Moses is then going to bring down to the people. And Moses is up there for 40 days and 40 nights, right? This is a very significant number that we're going to see. The number 40 shows up a lot throughout the books of the Bible, and typically it represents something that's going to end in a negative manner. And that's why whenever Jesus goes out into the wilderness, and he's tempted 40 days and 40 nights, and he comes back successful, it's a shocker. You're like, whoa, 40 usually represents something bad. But Moses is up there 40 days and 40 nights, and whenever he comes back down, what does he find? Tell us a little bit about the story that we get there.
Yeah, so whenever he comes back down, he finds that they have created this kind of golden statue, this idol, basically, for them to worship, and they call it Yahweh. So they are worshiping the God that Moses is talking to, but they are worshiping him through this golden statue, this golden calf, because they thought that since Moses was up there for so long, they're like, oh no, I don't think he's coming back down, so we need to figure out kind of like a way to worship God. And so they kind of took things into their own hands. But it's interesting because they had the commandments of like not making idols before they did that. So because that was in the commandments before Moses had went up to the mountain.
Yeah, so it's like, it's not like they have an excuse, right? It's not like they hadn't heard these 10 commandments. And like they'd heard this. And they were the ones who said, you know what, we want distance between us and God. And while they've gotten that distance, look what they do. They go and start disobeying the commandments, right? They put distance between themselves and their king. And while the mediator, Moses, is going receiving the rest of the law, he's gone for a little bit over a month. And already they have violated, like literally the second commandment, right? They have violated like one of the most important things. They haven't abandoned Yahweh, but they've minimized Yahweh, and therefore, in a way, they have abandoned him because they've changed who he is, right? They're saying, oh, this little golden statue is Yahweh, the one who delivered us. And it's like, no, this statue is the thing that you just made with your own 2 hands. And it's absolutely ridiculous.
Yeah. And Moses was not happy when he came down. He like broke the tablets.
No, Moses,
he was not happy about it.
Yes, if you look into the background of this whole slide thing we got here, you'll see that Charleston Heston Moses is holding up the 10 Commandment tablets in a very angry manner. That's because he's about to throw them down and break them because he's furious. But Moses is a really good leader. And so what he's going to do is he is going to go up to God. And he's going to try to appeal on behalf of the people. And that's where we meet him at in Exodus chapters 33 and 34. Moses goes before God, and he's appealing on behalf of the people. And he's saying, God, don't destroy these people. Because God is mad. God is saying, you know what? Like, God's like, I think I'm just going to destroy these people and start over with you. And Moses says, no. If you do that, what will the people think? I mean, the people of Egypt. Right? They think, oh, Yahweh was able to deliver them from us only to have them die in the wilderness. And Moses is like, do you want your glory to be challenged like that? Because you deserve all the glory. Show your graciousness instead. He's really encouraging God to show Hesed. Right? That's really what he's encouraging God to do. And that leads us to Exodus chapter 34. But in order to get there, I actually want to go a little bit further back and just read through the story so that whenever God actually uses the word, Hesed, that we'll really understand the impact of what he's saying. And so what we're going to do, we're going to start in Exodus chapter 33, just a chapter earlier, and we're going to go to verse 12, right? So this is after Moses has already appealed on behalf of the people, and he has already said, hey, God, forgive these people, don't destroy them, and God's agreed to that. And now we're going to see this next progression where Moses is actually going to ask if he can behold God, right? He's going to say, hey, I actually want to see you, which is a very remarkable thing to ask, and we're going to see how God responds to that. But ultimately, this is all setting the framework up so that whenever we move on a few chapters from now, God will actually come to dwell with the people, right? So keep in mind where this is heading. Okay, so what I'm going to do, I'm just going to read this first slide, and then I guess we can just talk through it.
Yeah.
Okay. Moses said to the Lord, see, you have been saying to me, bring this people up, but you have not let me know whom you will send with me. But you said, I know you by name, and also you have found favor in my sight. Now if I have found favor in your sight, show me your way, that I may know you, that I may continue to find favor in your sight, and see that this nation is your people. And the Lord said, my presence will go with you, and I will give you rest. And Moses said to him, if your presence does not go with us, do not take us up from here. For how will it be known then that I have found favor in your sight, I and your people? Is it not by your going with us, so that we will be distinguished, I and your people, from all the people who are on the face of the earth? The Lord said to Moses, I will do this thing also that you have requested, for you have found favor in my sight, and I know you by name. And Moses said, show me your glory. And the Lord said, I will make all my goodness pass before your face, and I will proclaim the Lord by name before you. I will be gracious to whom I will be gracious. I will show mercy to whom I will show mercy. But he added, you cannot see my face, for no one can see me and live. The Lord said, here is a place by me. You will station yourself on a rock. When my glory passes by, I will put you in a cleft in the rock, and will cover you with my hand while I pass by. Then I will take away my hand, and you will see my back, but my face must not be seen. All right, so here's kind of the setup for the occurrence of Hesed in the next slide. What do you think about it?
For one, I just want to say, like we were saying, Moses is a really good leader. Like, especially if you look in verses like 15 and 16, whenever he's saying, like, if we do not find favor in your sight, if you're not going to be with us, we don't, like, I'm going to just, like, say it on behalf of everyone, we don't want to go. So, like, Moses is very sure that he's like, we are going to go if God is with us, and that's it. So, he is very loyal. But it's also cool because we see, I feel like there's like, we're getting like a build up to the word Hesed because we're seeing different words throughout this that are usually
trigger words.
Yeah, with like favor and graciousness and mercy. Like all those words are ones they either use in the translation of the word Hesed or ones that always surround it.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like a build up. You're like, oh, I'm seeing like these words repeated, and it's like, oh man, what is this like going to build up to?
Yeah.
So it's kind of cool.
Yeah, I really like Michael Card's, like, the little term that he gives that, like, linguistic gravity. I love it because the way he views this is that Hesed is such a big and powerful and complicated and rich word that it almost is like a planet or just like a celestial body with like a gravitational pull, right? That's how big and important this word is. And so in order to properly understand what Hesed is, you have to have all these other words that are like setting it up and building it up so that whenever it's used, you're like, oh, whoa. I get it, right? So it pulls these words to it. And so you can literally see it. I tried to emphasize them as I was reading it. Favor, 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 graciousness, graciousness, mercy, mercy. Yeah. Like, it's building up to this to where God is emphasizing certain aspects of his character, and Moses is asking God about certain aspects of his character that's really building up to the use of Hesed. Yeah. But to go back to what you're saying about Moses here, this is something that I just really appreciate about just biblical literature, I guess. I'm a big literature nerd. I love reading. And I like tracing, I also like writing stories, and to me, one of the most interesting thing about writing stories is just seeing character arcs, right? And seeing how characters change over time. And this is really cool whenever you look at historical events, because you see how people are, like, how they change over time, and I really like that, because it's really satisfying in a fictional perspective whenever you see a character have a very satisfying arc. But it's even better whenever it's grounded in reality and you get to see these people being shaped. And just over the course of the book of Exodus, Moses really is shaped by God.
Oh, yes.
I mean, he starts off in the beginning of the book, and he's like he always has a passion for his people.
Yes.
But his passion seems misplaced, right? I mean, he goes and kills a person and thinks that he's going to almost maybe deliver them from violence, but then the people are not about that. And so Moses ends up having to flee into the wilderness, and it seems like all the stuff that he had to set him up as the deliverer ended up coming to nothing. And then there's this shift where God calls him at the burning bush, and in that moment, Moses is like, I don't want to do this. Like, the people have rejected me. They don't want me there. And I honestly don't want to be there. I've made a whole new life for myself, 40 years out here in the wilderness. I have a wife. I've got kids. I don't want to go back there. But God sends him. And whenever he sees what God does to deliver the people, there's a radical shift. So that by the time you get to Exodus 15 and he's leading people in that music, Moses is a totally different figure. And now here he is back at Mount Sinai, the place where he first met God, at the burning bush. And now God is showing up in much more than a burning bush. He is a giant fire cloud descending upon the mountain. Moses is just in awe of who God is. And we just see how this guy who is very hesitant to deliver the people, or at least had a very different perspective of how it should be done, now he has come to the realization that literally this is all about God. This is the guy who went into Pharaoh and he said, let my people go that they may serve me in the wilderness, right, on behalf of God. Right? So he realized that this was not about the people of Israel being free. It was not about the people of Israel getting to the land of Israel. It is about the people of Israel getting to God. And Moses has at last realized that. If you go to the beginning of the book, he seemed to think it was about the freedom. He seemed to think it was about just getting them to the land. That's why he killed that guard. But now he realizes, no, it's about getting them to God. And so you get to the thing that you're talking about here, verses 15 to 16, where he's like, hey, if you're not with us, don't, like, forget the land. Right? If it comes to us choosing between you fulfilling the covenant to Abraham and you just being with us, we choose you. And really, he's speaking on behalf of himself, right? He's just being a good leader. The people would probably not agree with this. The people do not want to be in the wilderness. But Moses is a good leader who knows what the people, like, if this was a democracy, Moses would probably be quickly voted out of office. Right?
He knows what they need, not what they want.
Exactly. He's the Batman, right? He's the hero that they need, but not the one they deserve. Okay. So,
and even just to go off of that, like, before the burning bush, we saw that, like, Moses didn't really want anything to do with, like, the covenant that God wanted him to help fulfill. But now we see him not only helping him fulfill that covenant and wanting to, but also asking for more from God. Like, he's, wants to see his glory. He wants to know more about him, wants to see more of him. So we see, like, he's even surpassing what we would think he would get to. So that's kind of cool.
If you focus on the story of the Bible, sometimes if you the theology is very crucial, right? I'm a big theology person. I really like correct theology. And I think this is actually an aspect of theology. But a lot of the times people fall into this whole works-based thing where, it's about trying to earn something from God. But if you actually just follow the story of the Bible and, like, the characters, like, if you study the characters, you'll realize that all of these successful people are the ones who realized it's less about what you do and more about what you desire, right? And Moses, we see that. He is the lawgiver, right? Whenever you get to the New Testament, if they're wanting to reference the law, they just say Moses, right? They're saying, according to Moses, and they're talking about the law, right? So he's the one who gave them the instructions on what to do to please God. But when you look at Moses as an actual character, he's not about just doing the commands. He's about getting near to God, right? To where just this radical shift, like, as we go through this, we're going to see, he's just like, I just want to be near to you. David's going to do the same thing. He is the king of Israel, the lawgiver. But instead, he's all about being close to God. So let's walk through this. Moses said to the Lord, see, you have been saying to me, bring this people up, but you've not let me know whom you will send with me. It's kind of a sad moment for Moses here because he feels alone. Right? Because here he is, he's wanting to mediate on behalf of the people, but he's by himself, right? God had kind of, Aaron was with him, but Aaron just led these people astray. Aaron's the one who literally made, Aaron's his brother, Aaron's the one who made the golden calf. And so here Moses is literally kind of by himself, and he's leading a people who he knows aren't totally behind this, right? They were more than happy to be delivered from Egypt, but now that they're in the wilderness, they don't really want anything to do with God.
And they complain. They always say, like, oh, can we go back to Egypt?
Yes, they're always grumbling, and they're not grateful. It's a big mess. And so he says, God, you've said to bring this people up, but you haven't told me who you're going to send with. Like, I'm kind of by myself here, and these people, they're a stubborn and obstinate people, And he's having a really tough time here. Like, Moses is getting a glimpse of what God already knew.
Yeah.
Right? This is what we see constantly with leaders in the Bible. Whenever they're put in that leadership position, they get a glimpse of how God feels because they see how hard it is to lead people to righteousness. But you said, I know you by name, and also you have found favor in my sight. Now, if I have found favor in your sight, show me your way. This is something that Moses constantly does. He recalls God's words back to him. He says, God, you said this to me. Prove it. This is not him testing God. This is him just being like, God, you made a promise. If that promise is true, do it.
Yeah.
Which I think that's actually a very healthy thing. He's not doing anything for personal gain here. He's doing it because he's like, God, I believe this to be true. It's time to act. It's kind of like he's praying in boldness. And like, you know, it's like, oh, wow, that's actually something that we need to be careful with because sometimes we do that in a very selfish way.
Right.
But that's not what Moses is doing here. He's like, hey, God, I'm all about what you're going about here, right? I think that these people need to serve you. I think that, like, I'm amazed by you delivering them. I'm amazed by this law you're giving them. I'm amazed that you're taking them to this land. But who's going to go with me? And how the heck do I know where to go, right? I need guidance. If I have found favor in your sight, like you said, show me your way, that I may know you, that I may continue to find favor in your sight, and see that this nation is your people. Do you notice how the words knowing God and finding favor are, they're almost synonymous here,
with each other,
right? That I may know you, that I may continue to find favor in your sight. Those two things go together. If you know God, you find favor in his sight.
Yep.
He's not saying that I may obey your commands, that I may fulfill your law. No, he's just saying, I want to know you. Knowing you is finding favor with you, right? And I just like the repeated use of favor here, right? Yeah. You said that I found favor in your sight. Well, if I have found favor, do something so I can continue finding favor.
Right, yeah.
It's like, whoa.
It's like the past, the present, and the future.
Yeah, and once again, setting up Hesed, right?
Yes.
Past favor, present favor, future favor. You see that God is somebody who shows favor.
Yeah.
Okay, well, we're going to build up to that. Okay, and see that this nation is your people, right? So he says, God, I know that I am leading these people, but I'm alone, and I need you to remember that these are your people. Right? Because what we've seen over the past few chapters is that God kind of is wanting to disassociate himself with the people of Israel. And it seems like he is kind of testing Moses a little bit, seeing how Moses is going to step up. But there are even places, I think it's in Exodus 32, maybe chapter earlier 33, whenever he's talking to Moses and he's like, hey, go down to your people. And Moses is like, no, these are your people, right? And they're almost kind of debating about whose people this is. Yeah. And Moses is saying, no, these are your people whom you delivered, whereas God's like, no, these are your people who you delivered. And Moses is like, don't put that on me. You made a covenant. This is your thing. And it seems like that's what God wanted him to do, right? He was kind of testing Moses there.
Yeah.
And Moses is like, no, these are your people. Verse 14, and the Lord said to Moses, my presence will go with you, and I will give you rest. Probably very comforting words.
Yes.
Right? Because in the previous chapters, he's been saying, maybe I won't go with you. Maybe y'all can just go do this on your own if you're going to keep being so stubborn. But because of Moses' intercession, God says, I will go with you. I will give you rest. Right? I know that Moses, you're probably stressed out right now. You've got a lot on your plate. But I've got you.
Yeah.
I'll take care of you. Trust in me. And Moses said to him, if your presence does not go with us, do not take us up from here. For how will it be known then that I have found favor in your sight, and I and your people? Is it not by your going with us, so that we will be distinguished, I and your people, from all the people who are on the face of the earth? I know that we've already talked about this a little bit, but what do you think about Moses' response here?
It's just great. Well, one, I didn't really notice it before, but God tells him, my presence will go with you. And it's almost like Moses wants to further clarify. He's like, okay, that's awesome, and I'm so glad that you're going with me, but I don't want to take that for granted. Like, if you weren't going with me, like, we're staying here. Like, we don't need the land if that means being apart from you. So it's interesting how even though God kind of puts that stamp of approval on there for Moses, he's like, but let me clarify, like, what I mean by I want you to go with me, you know? So that's cool.
Yeah, I think it's neat because if you think about it, these verses are not necessary. Right?
Yeah.
Because he says, my presence will go with you. Moses should just say, okay, cool.
Awesome.
That's all I wanted. But instead, Moses responds, and the reason why this would be included in the text is because it's important.
Yeah.
And it's because it shows us Moses' heart.
Yeah.
Right? Because Moses could say, okay, cool, and they could just go about it. But instead, we get insight into Moses' heart. Right? He says, if your presence does not go with us, don't take us up from here. And it's like, God already said it will.
Yeah.
You don't have to clarify this. But it's because we're seeing how Moses feels.
Yeah.
Right? Moses, like, it's not like he's trying to convince God.
No.
God's already convinced.
Right.
Right? He's not trying to be like, oh, well, you know what? We're staying right here till you agree. He's not being like a little kid who's being stubborn.
Yeah.
No, he's like a little kid who is gracious for all that his parents are doing. Right? And he's like, hey, I'm glad that you're going with us because I wouldn't want to go anywhere else but with you. And if it had to be one or the other, we would on behalf of the people, would rather stay here with you at this mountain than go to a land flowing with milk and honey without you. This is something that, just applicationally speaking, I wonder how many Christians would say this about heaven. Because a lot of the times it seems like people want to go to heaven purely because of, living eternally, or because they think that they're going to get every single thing that they possibly want, or really they might long for heaven because of all the promises that we receive about it, right? It being a place free of sin, free of sorrow, free of fear, full of joy. I wonder how many people want it because of those reasons. Because to me, that's sad. The reason we should want to be in heaven is because that's where God's at. And I think we see that with Moses here, right? He's got that same idea. He's like, I would rather live in the wilderness with you all the days of my life than go to the promised land and not be with you. I would say the same thing. I would rather live with God in this sin-trodden world all the days of my life than to go to heaven and God not be there. Right? That's how our hearts should be, I believe. And I don't know if I always live up to that kind of belief, but that's where it should be at, I think. And Moses demonstrates that here. For how will it be known to them that I found favor in your sight? Right? So we see this progression once again. Favor in the past, favor in the present, favor in the future. And then, how will it be known? How will others know? Right? It's if you're with us, right? That's how people know that we have found favor in your sight. If you took us out in the wilderness and then abandoned us, nobody's going to know that we are your people. And so, stick with us. And it's cool because, once again, it's because Moses wants the people identified with God. Right? That's why. God has already said he's going to be with them. He's not trying to strong-arm God here. He's just saying, these people were made to be your people, and so it's important that they are known as such. If you abandon us, it's no good. Right? We might be known as the people of Yahweh, but what good does it do to be known as your people if your presence isn't with us? We see that Moses really is yearning for that Eden-like mentality.
And this is kind of ties into whenever we see Moses other times kind of appealing to God's glory. When he's like, hey, if you don't do this, the people around, like, you're the same God who delivered us from Egypt, from Pharaoh, and put all of these plagues and parted the Red Sea so that we can cross it. If you don't fulfill this, then your glory won't be known to other people. So that's kind of the same idea. If your presence isn't with us, people won't know about you that aren't the Israelites themselves.
His heart's just in the right place. Like, he gets it. Like, that's why Moses is so important. People focus on him for, I think, the wrong reasons. And I think that's because a lot of the times we don't read this stuff in Exodus, right? We read through this story of them being delivered from Egypt.
To the Red Sea.
And then we read the golden calf story. And then we jump to the story of the bronze serpent. But when you look at Exodus chapters 32 through 34, that whole narrative there, I think that is Moses at his highest and best. And this guy gets it. Like, he understands what so few people, both in the Bible and in history, get. He understands it's all about being close to God. Is it not by your going with us so that we will be distinguished, I and your people, from all the people who are on the face of the earth? Like, you can almost imagine Moses here. I mean, obviously, I don't know if all the laws were etched into stone, or if he had them on paper or something, but you could almost imagine him holding them over the fire, being like, this law is no good if you're not with us. Right? He's like, that's not the thing that makes us set apart. This law, that's nothing. It's the fact that that law came from you and that you are the king. Right? If you're not with us, we're not set apart. I don't care what law we have, it doesn't set us apart from anything. You're the reason we're set apart, and so we need you to be with us. But once again, it's funny because God doesn't need any convincing. God has already agreed to this.
He's already said.
This is just like a man who has, typically, whenever a man proposes, he starts off by giving this very flowery speech, just saying why he thinks the girl should do it. Then he gets on his knees and proposes. it's almost like Moses flips the script. He proposes, and then after she has already agreed to marry him, then he starts saying, now these are the reasons I love you. And like he goes, it's like, whoa, like it's almost like he's trying to convince him. It's almost like the man is trying to convince her after the fact.
Yeah.
She doesn't need any convincing. At this point, it's just because he loves her and he just wants to vocalize his love. That's what Moses is doing here, right? He's not convincing God of anything. God has already agreed in verse 14 to go with them.
Yeah.
Moses is just voicing his love.
Yeah.
And he's saying, God, I get it. The reason why I'm harping on this is because we need you.
And to take that further, God already knows his heart anyways.
Yeah.
So he doesn't really have to voice it in order for God to know where his heart is at.
Yeah, absolutely.
So for him to even say it out loud, that takes it even further.
For sure. The Lord said to Moses, I will do this thing also that you have requested, for you have found favor in my sight, and I know you by name. That's the 5th time we've seen the word favor, right? Present favor. Oh, no, past favor, present favor, future favor. Let people know that I found favor. You have found favor. So God's once again affirming it. And I know you by name. I know you, Moses. Right? That's cool.
Yeah.
Very special. I mean, it goes back to, goes to the future, to Isaiah, where you have God speaking this to the people of Israel. I have called you by name. You are mine. This is the stuff for a lot of people subscribed to this channel. They found us because of The Chosen. First episode of The Chosen. It's all about God knowing them by name. And this leads to verse 18. Moses says, show me your glory. Right? This is where Moses finally just puts his cards on the table, and it seems like it kind of reminds me of the myth of Cupid and Psyche, where Psyche is this woman who's just fallen madly in love with Cupid, but she's not allowed to see him, and so finally she grabs like a lantern and like shines it on him and stuff like that. Vastly different story, but it kind of reminds me of that, where Moses is like, hey, I've seen the clouds. I have seen the fire. I've seen the burning bush. I have seen your wonders performed. I just want to see you.
Yeah.
Right? Like, it's almost like this is bubbled up so much within him. He's like, God, it's all about being close to you, and I want to put a face to the person I'm talking about. Like, I desperately want to see you. You see, like, this longing for, like, Eden has bubbled up within him. He's like, I just want to be like Adam walking with you in the garden. Show me your glory. And the Lord said, I will make all my goodness pass before your face, and I will proclaim the Lord by name before you. I will be gracious to whom I will be gracious. I will show mercy to whom I show mercy. But he added, you cannot see my face, for no one can see me and live. And so he says, Moses, like you see God's like flattered by it. He's like, you know what? I will pass before you, and I will make all my goodness known to you, and I will proclaim the Lord by name before you. This is important. He says, when he passes before Moses, he will make himself known to Moses. Hold on to that, because we're going to see how God makes himself known.
Right.
But for right now, he says, I will pass before you. I will proclaim who I am to you. Why? Because I'm gracious to whom I can be gracious. Right? He's like, you don't deserve for me to do this, but you've asked for it. I can be gracious to who I want to be gracious. If I want to show you who I am, I can do that. I will show mercy to whom I'll show mercy. Right? You have grace and mercy. They're two sides of the same coin. I forget how people talk about it. It's like mercy is giving somebody that which they don't deserve, and grace is giving, or not giving people what they do deserve, or something like it. Either that or it's flipped around. I don't remember. I'm not going to sit and process it right now. But they're the two sides of the same coin, right? I can show grace and mercy to whoever I want. And even though you don't deserve to see me, and even though you do deserve to not see me, I'll pass before you because your heart's in the right place. Man looks to the outward appearance. God looks to the heart. The men at the bottom of the mountain, they probably don't want Moses in charge. God's looking at Moses and says, you are the perfect person. This is why I chose you, because I knew you'd get it. And he says, I will pass before you. I will make my goodness go before you. Right? So we see that whatever God's going to do, whatever he's going to do when he passes in front of Moses, is going to be in some way related to his character and his goodness. I imagine the Hebrew word there is tob, right? Whenever God looked at creation and said, it is good, right? I will make this go before you. But he added, verse 20, you cannot see my face, for no one can see me and live. We just see God's like, hey, I wish that I could grant you that. But the issue is that you are still a sinful person. And even if your heart's in the right place, my glory is too great. As much as you might long for Eden, Eden's gone. Eden, it's not going to be here for a while. My commitment is to dwell with you once again. I'm going to get as close to you as I possibly can. But if a sinful person beheld my glory, they would instantly die. Because I'm too righteous, I'm too good, I'm too holy. I can make my goodness pass before you, but you're going to have to look at a distance.
Yeah.
I can't get as close as you might want. And so it's kind of sad, but he's like, I can give you as close as possible.
But yeah.
Right? I'll get so close that your face will glow. But I can't get too close, because if you died, the people would be without this amazing leader.
There needs to be someone to lead, and we can see that the people down there are probably not a good idea.
Yeah, and so he's like, Moses, I appreciate this. Thank you. I will pass before you, but I can't give you your full request. I'm sorry. I'll be gracious. I'll be as gracious as possible, but I can't do that. So the Lord said, here's a place by me. You'll station yourself on a rock. When my glory passes by, I will put you in a cleft in the rock and will cover you with my hand while I pass by. Then I will take away my hand and you will see my back, but my face must not be seen. So it's like, you get the imagery of Adam and Eve hiding behind the trees whenever they hear God walking through the garden, right? It's like, God's like, okay, I'll get as close to you as possible, but you still can't see me, right? Whenever I come in front of you, I'm going to put you in this cliff. I'm going to cover you with my hand so you can't fully see me, but I'll let you see me from behind, right? So you can't see my actual face. And that leads us to Exodus chapter 34. Right, and as we see, there are going to be two places where Hesed shows up here, one of which is accompanied by the word emet, right? Grace and truth, loving kindness and faithfulness. And so I'm going to read through verses 1 through 9, and then we will actually break this down. Sound good? All right, so here's the big moment. I hope that you feel the anticipation with us. Because, I always get excited going to Exodus 32 through 34, because this, to me, is probably, like, the high moment and, like, the climax of the entire Torah.
Yeah.
Because you just have Moses at his best, and God at his, like, happiest, because he's like, wow, somebody gets it. And then God's, like, passing in front here, and then God proclaims who he is, and this is, like, my favorite part of the entire Torah. And so I hope you feel the anticipation. So here's the setup. The Lord said to Moses, cut out 2 tablets of stone like the first, and I will write on the tablets the words that were on the first tablets, which you smashed. Be prepared in the morning, and go up in the morning to Mount Sinai, and station yourself for me there on the top of the mountain. I believe thus far he's been talking to him from the tent of meeting at the bottom of the mountain. No one is to come up with you. Do not let anyone be seen anywhere on the mountain. Not even the flocks or the herds may graze in front of that mountain. So Moses cut out 2 tablets of stone like the first. Early in the morning he went up to Mount Sinai, just as the Lord had commanded him. And he took in his hand the 2 tablets of stone. The Lord descended in the cloud and stood with him there and proclaimed the Lord by name. The Lord passed by before him and proclaimed, the Lord, the compassionate and gracious God, slow to anger and abounding in Hesed and emet, keeping Hesed for thousands, forgiving iniquity and transgression and sin. But he by no means leaves the guilty unpunished, responding to the transgression of fathers by dealing with children and children's children to the 3rd and 4th generation. Moses quickly bowed to the ground and worshipped, and said, If now I have found favor in your sight, O Lord, let my Lord go among us, for we are a stiff-necked people. Pardon our iniquity and our sin, and take us for your inheritance. There it is.
So cool.
All right. What do you think?
It's cool. We see some of those same words kind of surrounding again. We see compassionate, we see gracious, we see favor again. But it's also cool that the Lord kind of reveals himself to Moses. And the first thing that Moses says after God explains how he is a God of Hesed is him asking for Hesed, for him and his people. So it's like he gets it. And we see that he gets it before. But now, like, we really see that, God reveals himself to him. He's abounding in Hesed. And Moses is like, okay, you said you're abounding in Hesed. I'm going to ask for it for like me and my people. So
yeah, he immediately he sees who God is, and he immediately falls down. He's like, yeah, we need you on our side for sure. That was awesome. Yeah. Can we do that again? It's like a kid on like a roller coaster. He's like, that was awesome. That was totally wicked. So really cool story. And I think it's enhanced whenever you understand really where it falls in the context of all this. And so, let's walk through it. The Lord said to Moses, cut out 2 tablets of stone like the first, and I will write on the tablets the words that were on the first tablets which you smashed. It's just kind of funny because it seems like that was kind of like a little slight on God's part where he's like, yeah, remember those first things? Remember how I made you those first 2 stones and the first thing you did was go smash them? I guess I'll let it slide and I'll make him again.
Yeah.
Because I don't think God told him to smash the stones. I think Moses was just really mad. And it represented something, right? I mean, here he'd been receiving the law from God. He comes down, and the people have already broken the few laws they'd already received.
Yeah.
And so Moses smashes them, and he's like, this is what you've done.
Yeah.
And God's
I can just imagine, like, Moses excited. You know, he's up there, like, 40 days, and he's, like, coming down the mountain with the law. And he's like, guys, look what I got. I was just talking with God. And then he's, like, the first thing he sees when he, like, rounds the corners and, like, worshiping, like, a false
Well,
god.
the sad part is that in the Bible, like, biblically, God told him. Like, he's like, okay, Moses, time to go down to the people. And he's like, by the way, they're already screwing up.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, no. Yeah. And then he goes down to Joshua, and he's like, and Joshua's like, oh, what's going on over there? Is it like a battle? And Moses is like, no. It's a sound of singing and dancing. They're having a party. And then they go down there. And he's like, y'all suck. Like, y'all are literally the worst. I've been up here 40 days, 40 nights. And you had one job, guys.
Yeah.
10 commands. 10 commands. It's like, okay. Yeah. And so God's like, hey, I'll remake the tablets. I'll redo it. It's fine. Just grab 2 stones. Like, that's all. I'll even etch it with my fingers. You just bring the stones to me. We'll fix it. Yeah. Cut out 2 tablets of stone like the first, and I'll write on the tablets the words that were on the first tablets which you smashed. Be prepared in the morning, and go up in the morning to Mount Sinai and station yourself for me there on the top of the mountain. Right? So come back to the place where we first met. Right? Ascend the mountain. Come to the top early in the morning. And that is where I will show you my glory as much as I possibly can. No one is to come up with you. Do not let anyone be seen anywhere near the mountain. Not even the flocks or the herds may graze in front of the mountain. No Aaron, no Joshua. I don't even want any goats nearby, because they're not going to be able to handle it. Because what I'm about to do for you is something special, right? Like, you're going to want to write that. You're going to want to write about this later. But nobody is allowed anywhere nearby. Because we get the idea that people cannot be that close to God, right? This is God being extra gracious, and Moses is putting himself in a very scary situation, right? I mean, he is like he could easily die here if things don't go according to plan.
Right.
If you think about it, this is exactly, like, Moses is responding the exact opposite of how the people responded. The people saw God's glory, and they were like, we want to be far away. Moses saw God's glory, and he's like, I want to be closer. And God's like, bro, you might die. And Moses is like, that's fine with me. I just want to be as close to you as possible. And so God's like, okay, make the right preparations. Come early in the morning. Make sure nobody comes with you. I don't even want, like, a kid playing on the edge of the mountain. I don't want a goat just going across the hill. No, like, get everybody off. Like, this mountain needs to be barren. It's just me and you, right? He's getting a private audience with God. So Moses cut out 2 tablets of stone like the first. Early in the morning, he went up to Mount Sinai. I always like whenever we see the phrase early in the morning. Yeah. In the Bible. Especially, like, in the earlier books, like in, like, Genesis through Deuteronomy, like in the Torah. It seems like that's a phrase that Moses usually implements or uses to kind of just highlight excitement or just diligence. Yeah. Right? So it's either a person's really excited to go about something, or they're just very obedient. I'm sure that that Abraham was not enthused about having to sacrifice his son, but it still says that he rose early in the morning, right? And so we see that early in the morning is always something that just denotes, an extra amount of obedience, submissiveness, but it also can, like, have some excitement there as well. And I think we see the excitement here with Moses. Yeah. He's like early in the morning. He's like, poof. You imagine he was like restless all night. Yeah. He probably was just like laying in bed. He was like trying to get sleep. He's like, I can't sleep. Finally, he just like wakes up early. He's like, okay, let's do this. Yeah. He goes up early in the morning to Mount Sinai, just as the Lord had commanded him. That's a phrase that we're going to see a lot in the latter half of this book of Exodus. Just as the Lord commanded. Just as the Lord commanded. Because we actually finally get to see Moses and the people submitting to God, which paves the way for him to come dwell with them. Right. So just as the Lord commanded him, he did this. And he took in his hand the 2 tablets of stone. So here we see Moses, 80 years old. He's got his 2 tablets under his hand, and he's going up to have a little lunch date with God. Verse 5. This is a big moment. The Lord descended in the cloud. Just think about the imagery there. The last time we've seen Jesus on earth, he's ascending in the cloud. Right? Just kind of Compare and contrast there. The Lord descended in the cloud and stood with him there. What?
Yeah,
this is crazy. The last time we saw God standing with man was in the Garden of Eden. I mean, since then, we've seen, like, the angel of the Lord who seems to be God.
Yeah.
But that is God in, like, a corporeal form, as in, like, you know, taking on human flesh. Not in the same way that Jesus took on human flesh, but he's showing up in human appearance. Right? This is different. This is God. I'm not saying that God has a human form or something. I don't know what God looks like. I haven't seen him. But in some way, God is specifically manifesting himself before Moses here. And standing before him like he would have stood before Adam in the Garden of Eden. And he's showing up. And he stands there. And just like he said, he proclaims his name. Well, proclaims Yahweh by name. Right? So he passes before him and he says, this is who I am. This is the big moment. This is the closest man has ever been to God since the Garden of Eden. And this is the author of the Torah recounting this event. And this is what God has to say. The Lord passed by before him and proclaimed, Yahweh, Yahweh, the compassionate and gracious God, slow to anger and abounding in Hesed and Emet, keeping Hesed for thousands, forgiving iniquity and transgression and sin. But he by no means leaves the guilty unpunished, responding to the transgression of fathers by dealing with children and children's children to the third and fourth generation. This is the big moment. This is, I mean, I know that we are already getting near to the end of this video. But the build-up was necessary. What do you think about God's statement here?
What I find interesting, one, we see Hesed is in there twice, right? And then we also see Emet. But if you look at the structure of what he said itself, he talks about all of these good characteristics that he has. And then after that, after he lists all of them, he mentions, but, like, people, like, I'm still righteous. And so people that have sinned are not going to go unpunished. So even the way that he structures what he said supports the fact that he's a God of Hesed. Because the graciousness is so outnumbered by the, like, him punishing people, if that makes sense.
Well, and I think that whenever you look at the Hesed and Emet thing, I think those are the two primary things. Because I think on both ends you have demonstrations of this, right? So the demonstrations of Hesed, like, Hesed is both a positive and negative. We see both sides of it here, right? On the more positive aspect of things, he's compassionate and gracious, slow to anger, right? Those are the three positive things. Hesed. But he's also a God of Emet, and that means he has standards. But fortunately for us, that standard involves Hesed for thousands, forgiving iniquity and transgression and sin. But because of that standard, he by no means will leave the guilty unpunished. Right? And so I think that really both of these, like, from both sides, if you're working your way inwards, it culminates in Hesed and Emet as being the primary attributes of God. Right? So you have Hesed and Emet, grace and truth, loving kindness and faithfulness. Those are the two primary attributes of God that he's demonstrating here, and all the others are demonstrations of those two things. Right? And so I think it's really kind of just building up right there. But let's walk through this piece by piece. Yahweh, Yahweh, right? Just imagine, like, if you can just, like, close your eyes for a second and just imagine Moses standing there in the clefts of the rock, God passing in front of him. And for the first time, he hears God's voice, not like a distant voice, but it's close and it's personal and it's right there. And he proclaims his own name. He says, Yahweh, Yahweh, the compassionate and gracious God. Right? So this is how God identifies himself. What sets this God apart from all the other gods? He's compassionate and gracious. What other God can you say is like that? Right? You look at the gods of, I mean, let's think from Moses' perspective, right? The gods of Midian, the gods of the Canaanites, the gods of Egypt. None of them are compassionate or gracious. That's the thing that sets the Judeo-Christian God apart from every other God. He's compassionate and gracious. You would expect God to be big. You would expect him to be righteous. You would expect him to know more than we know. You would expect him to be in more places than we can be at. You would not expect God to be compassionate or gracious. But the God of Israel is. And that's the first thing he uses to identify himself. I am the compassionate and gracious God. If you forget my name and you forget all the things I've done, all you need to do is say the compassionate and gracious God and you found me. Right? This is the God who he suffers with his people, compassion, right? He feels for his people, and he gives them that which they don't deserve, right? He is gracious. He's also slow to anger, right? It doesn't mean that he doesn't have anger. It just means that he's very patient, right? He is long-suffering, right? He is willing to put up with a lot before he actually lashes out in anger. And we see this a lot.
Yeah.
Even after he gives them the law, he still is very gracious with them, and he's still very slow to anger, just, very hesitant to actually inflict upon them the punishments from the law.
Right.
And then you get it, right? So, compassionate, gracious, slow to anger. You see that all these words that we've seen, like the linguistic gravity of it, it's pulling us in, and it's building up to this one moment. We've seen favor like a bajillion times already.
Yeah.
We've seen compassion a few times. We've seen mercy. We've seen grace a few times. And then finally we get it, abounding in Hesed. Right? What do you think about that? What does God mean when he says he's abounding in Hesed?
Well, all of those things that have like constantly built up over this time, the compassion, the grace, the slow to anger, all of that, it's really culminated in this one word, Hesed. But what is really cool is that it's not that it's just there. He says that it's abounding. There's a plentiful amount. Like, it's not just a little bit to get you along. Like, it is so much of it that
overflowing.
that you just like cannot even handle how much there is, which is just really cool.
Yeah, I imagine like one of those like Thanksgiving like cornucopias,
Mm-hmm.
or it's like, like all
like
the
pouring out.
Yes, it's just pouring out, right?
Yeah.
This is who God is.
Yeah.
He is abounding in Hesed. According to Michael Card's definition, Hesed is whenever you give someone something they have no right to expect. And that's exactly what God's identifying himself with. I am a God who is compassionate and gracious. Would you expect God to be that way? No. You would expect God to not care. I mean, compassionate? Like, that means you're suffering with somebody. That means you care. If there's this great big creator God who created all things, and just think about it. Like, let's just go by modern standards, right? 7+ billion people on one tiny planet, which is one of 9 or 8 planets, whatever, under one star, which is just one of 100+ billion stars in one galaxy, which is just one of 100 billion plus galaxies in the known universe, all of which God spans with his fingers. Would you expect God to care about one human being? No, but he does. Do we have a right to expect that? No. Would you expect him to give us that which we don't deserve? No. You wouldn't expect that. You would think he would give us exactly what we deserve. Slow to anger. Would you expect God to be slow to anger? No. I mean, think about that. I mean, think about how many bosses feel entitled to get angry with their employees for just not doing, like, just small things. Yeah. God is so much bigger, right? We owe everything to him. He is entitled to every single thing. And if we disobey in even the slightest infraction, we would expect him to get very angry. Because he's like, who do you think you are to disobey me? That's what we would expect.
Right.
But he doesn't do that. Instead, he's patient with us. And so he says, yeah, I'm abounding in Hesed. This is who I am. I just show Hesed, and I'm constantly giving people what they have no right to expect. I give them compassion. I give them grace. I'm slow to anger. I'm patient with them. I love them. We have no right to expect that. And that's why Hesed is so important. That's why the term itself is so crucial, because if you understand what Hesed is, specifically in how it relates to God, you will understand the gospel. You will understand the Bible. That's why this is so important, because God says, this is my key attribute. I constantly give people what they have no right to expect. And if you view God under that lens, everything makes sense. Because God is constantly doing the exact opposite what you'd expect him to do. I would say, we even see, David in the Psalms, he contemplates this idea whenever he's like, who is man that you would be mindful of him? It's the same idea. You are this, amazing, magnificent, huge God. Who am I? I'm just this tiny little ant you could crush with your thumb. Yeah. It's why would you be mindful of me? Why would you show me this Hesed and this grace and this mercy and this compassion? Why is it? And then that goes back to really a question that we've talked about on this channel before. Why does God choose to love us? Yep. It's just something that we just don't understand, and it's ingrained in who God is. Yep. But I mean, that's really encapsulated in what Hesed is. Yeah, and it's perplexing because nowadays we have this very entitled mindset where we just think that we are the most amazing people, and sometimes we think we just deserve God's love. And even whenever you feel undeserving of it, we have these weird theologies where we try to encourage people and be like, no, you do deserve it. No, you don't. I'm just going to say it right here and right now. Yeah. Maybe it'll lose me some subscribers. You do not deserve God's love. No. But you have it. That's the surprising thing. Right. That's the whole point. You're not deserving. You're not worthy. You shouldn't expect it. But he gives it, and that's what makes it so crazy. We think that we're entitled to all these things, and we suffer from pride and narcissism and all this stuff because we have made God smaller than he is, and we've made ourselves bigger than we are. But if you actually adopt the biblical worldview of who we are and who God is, we would recognize that God makes no sense. But he is. Like, he is real, but logically, he makes no sense to the human mind because he's way too big to care for somebody so small as us. Yet he has made us just lower than the heavenly beings, and he has put us over all creation. What the heck? This God is compassionate, he's gracious, he's slow to anger. We have no right to expect that, and we're fools if we think that we do. And that is what God's declaring right here. He is saying, this is what sets me apart from all other gods. This is what makes me the one true God, because you can't make this up. If you're making up, just go look at all the, just go find a random fictional book set in a fantasy world and go see if you can find a person who has this much power, yet who is this gracious and perfect to individuals. You won't find it, right? This God cannot be made up because he defies human reason. He is a God who, for some reason, has ultimate power, yet doesn't abuse it. And instead, he is gracious to those who have no power, and he serves the people with the least power. That's what's so confusing, and that's why when you get to Jesus dying, he is the ultimate form of Hesed. And it makes no sense. If you don't understand Hesed, you don't understand the gospel, because Jesus is going to show up, and you're going to be like, why would God do it this way? Like, why did he have to die? But if you understand Hesed, you realize that's who God is. Like, there's no other way this could have gone. He gives you what you have no right to expect. If God demands that sinners have to die, you would never expect that he would become a man and die on behalf of sinners. You would have no right to expect that. But if you know that God is somebody who does something which you have no right to expect, all of a sudden it makes sense. But let's continue a little bit. He's abounding in Hesed, but he's also abounding in truth, faithfulness, emet, right? He's got a standard. He's going to fulfill his covenants. He's going to hold that standard of righteousness. He's going to do that as well. And so you have these two things being held in tension with one another, right? I think that's why we constantly see them lifted up, because on one hand, he is a God who gives people what they have no right to expect. On the other hand, he is a God who has standards. Right? And that's why we have Hesed and Emet always showing up next to each other, because Hesed can be abused. Right? What's he going to do? Is he going to allow a sinful, degenerate person to go into heaven? No. But he will give that sinful, degenerate person a way out. Right? And so that's the Hesed and Emet being held in tension, right? Because he's not just, he does have a standard. He's not going to allow a sinner and a wicked person to dwell in his presence, but he will give them a way to get out of that sinful state, right? And so he's got these two things. Yes, he loves giving people what they don't deserve, what they have no right to expect, but he is righteous, he is good, he is faithful, he has a standard, and you have to remember that. A lot of the times, we always go to extremes, and we pick one or the other. You have the people who hyper-emphasize the Hesed, right? And they're all about God is gracious, and they take away his standards. But then you have the other people who emphasize the standards, and they become legalists who forget about the Hesed, right? And they're all about, oh, God has these commands, and you have to do them, and if you don't do them, you're going to hell. It's like, whoa, no, you should go to hell, but he's giving you a way out, right? And so you have to have these two in tension, and that's why they always show up next to each other. He's abounding in Hesed and in Emet, abounding in both, right? He has a superabundance of graciousness and steadfast love, but he also has a superabundance of righteousness and goodness and truthfulness and faithfulness. His standard is not a low standard, right? It's not like there's a minimum requirement. It's like, no, he has the highest standard possible. He is perfectly righteous, perfectly holy, perfectly good, perfectly true, perfectly beautiful. And if you fail to meet that standard, that's where you need the Hesed. Right? And so you need both, right? The faithfulness and the truth makes you inadequate, but the Hesed allows you to come into his presence once again.
And that's another thing. We talked about seeing Hesed in the Gospels, but even Emet too. Whenever we look at the crucifixion of Christ, there is a standard. There was a price to pay because we are sinners, but he sent his son down to pay our sin for us, or our transgressions for us. So the faithfulness is still there. The price was still paid. but he showed us Hesed that we didn't have to pay
Absolutely.
it. There was someone else that paid it for us. And then by placing our faith and our trust in him, we're able to take that.
Yeah. Once again, if you take either of those two attributes of God out, you lose the gospel, right? He is a God who has a righteous standard, and he is faithful, and he is true, but he's going to provide you a way to gain access to him through that.
Yeah.
Right? And so he's going to give you what you have no right to expect. And that's why Jesus is the embodiment of this. Here, God's passing in front of Moses and says, you can't stand in front of me because you cannot see me and live. Jesus came down and fixed that. Because of God's Hesed and Emet, Jesus came down so that we could see God and live. And people saw him for 3.5 years, but not in the same glory that we're going to see him again in the future.
Yeah.
Right? And so Jesus paved the way to fix the problem that Moses is currently facing right here.
And both of these things, God uses them as a way for you to be closer to him. So we see Moses is constantly being like, God, I want to be closer to you. I want to be more near to you. I want to come closer to you. And by God showing his Hesed and his Emet, that is a pathway for you to be closer to him. It's always to be closer to God. And that's two ways to get there.
Yeah, his Emet is the thing that keeps us at a distance because we're not perfect, but the Hesed is the thing that's constantly drawing us closer. He keeps Hesed for thousands, right? So there's our second occurrence, right? So, like, if one of these is being elevated above, once again, we see it's Hesed, right? Because Emet shows up once, Hesed shows up twice, because this is who God is. He constantly likes to give people what they have no right to expect. And you wouldn't expect for God to keep showing graciousness and loving kindness and steadfast love and covenantal love and mercy and compassion, all these other words that Hesed's translated as. You wouldn't expect him to show that to thousands of people. Forgiving iniquity? What? I mean, think about how often we are unwilling to forgive those who slightly wrong us. We have no right to expect them to do something right by us, right? We're just humans. He's God. He has every right to expect total obedience. But he's willing to forgive us our iniquities and our transgressions and our sins, right? Those are the three most common words to describe human failures. And he mentions all of them. He covers all of them. He's like, I'm willing to forgive all three of these things because of my Hesed. Do you see why Hesed's so crucial to our theology? Because the only way we get to dwell with God is if he shows us Hesed. Because he needs to forgive us of those things, and we see that Hesed is tied to that. That's why I say it's probably very comparable to the New Testament doctrine of grace. Because Hesed obviously does not show up in the New Testament because it's New Testament's written in Greek. But the Greek concept of grace, as Paul uses it specifically, and as John uses it, really seem to line up with Hesed, right? It's how sins are forgiven and how man comes to dwell in the presence of God once again. Were you going to say something? Oh, okay. So he keeps Hesed for thousands, forgiving iniquity, transgression, sin. You would not expect a perfectly righteous God to do this. First off, you wouldn't expect him to care about humans enough to even want to do it. But not only does he want to do it, he actually goes through with it and performs it. But, here's where the Emet comes in. He by no means leaves the guilty unpunished, responding to the transgression of fathers by dealing with children and children's children to the third and fourth generation. So there will be consequences for sin. You might go and perform some great sin that results in not only you being harmed, but future generations, which is sad. But because God has a standard, he's not just going to let it slide. And you need to realize that there are certain ways the world works. And if you do not live according to God's standard, you're more likely going to get bit in the butt at some point. Right? And God's going to allow that to happen to you. Why? Mainly to point you back to him. If God didn't punish sin, and if he didn't punish iniquity, how would anybody know what he stood for? How would anybody know that there was a problem? Instead, you look at the world and you see how broken and corrupted it is, and you realize this is not how we were created to be. We were created for something different. There is a righteous standard out there, and it becomes our life's mission to figure out where that standard's at. And the amazing thing is that whenever we find that standard, it's found in God, and he's actually allowed us to access it again. And he says, according to my Hesed, you can be righteous, which is crazy. And so this is, and don't worry, we're wrapping up. This is how God identifies himself, right? This is a big deal. The reason why we lingered so much on this is because according to God himself, this is who he is. I'm in seminary right now. I should be graduating soon, in the fall, Lord willing. That's exciting. But I've taken countless classes which are just all about who God is, right? I mean, which is understandable, right? I took an entire class literally dedicated to just the attributes of God. But right here, you have it summarized by God himself.
Yeah.
Right? This is the crash course on who God is. And typically we talk about his omnipotence and his omniscience and his omnipresence, right? He's all powerful, all knowing, he's everywhere. We usually emphasize that stuff, but that's not what God emphasizes.
Yeah.
God emphasizes his holiness, right? He doesn't use the word holy here, but he's set apart in the way, like in this instance here, because of his Hesed and his Emet, right? He is set apart because he shows people what they have no right to expect, because he is above everything, yet he's willing to love and care for and forgive people who are less than nothing, right? They were people who he esteemed high, and they chose to give that up to pursue themselves. And then he's gracious to them. So this is what God emphasizes. And so really, you don't even need the whole crash course. As long as you understand Exodus chapter 34, verses 6 through 7, right? 2 verses. If you understand those 2 verses, you understand the God of the Old Testament, the God of the New Testament. You might not know Jesus' name, but whenever you hear about Jesus and what he did, you'll immediately be like, ah, that's the God of the Old Testament, right? That is the same God. And that's why people need to study the Old Testaments, because people never study them, and they're always like, ooh, the God of the Old Testament is just a jerk. Are you kidding me? Read this.
Verse. Yeah.
Like, read this. This is who God is. You want to know? And God doesn't just say this out of nowhere. He's demonstrated it, right? Anybody, like, I could get up here in front of you, and I could be like, hi, I'm David. I'm the most good-looking man in the world. I'd have to prove that, right?
Right.
I mean, I would have to I can't, you can say anything.
Yeah.
The question is, do your actions line up with who you are or what you do? Yes, literally God is demonstrating Hesed and Emet in this moment. Because guess what? He has a standard and Moses doesn't meet it. Moses cannot see God and live because God has a standard. He has Emet. But God also has Hesed, and he's willing to show Moses, he's willing to get as close as possible to Moses.
Yeah.
Right? So God is literally embodying these things right here, right now, in this instance. And that's why we had the entire book of Genesis, right?
Yeah.
Genesis allowed us to meet this God so that whenever he identifies himself in Exodus to Moses, we understand, oh, that is the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Whenever you read that this is how God describes himself, now you can go back to Genesis and say, where do we see God's Hesed and Emet throughout this book? And it's there a lot, right? And so we've had the background, and then when God shows up, we're like, oh, that is him.
Yeah.
And so I get so tired of people when they talk about the Old Testament God being a jerk. No, he's not. He is this God, and if you actually study the book, you'll see that's true.
Yeah.
And whenever Jesus shows up, you'll know, like, if you know God's character from the Old Testament, you won't be a Pharisee who denies Jesus. You'll look at him and you'll be like, yeah, this is literally the embodiment of God.
Right.
Like, this is God in the flesh. He is doing all these crazy things we have no right to expect, but he also has this holy standard. Look at the Sermon on the Mount. Jesus. Whoa. But yeah. And so this is how God identifies himself. And then to wrap up, verses 8 and 9, this is how Moses responds. And I think this might be a good application for us to kind of just leave here, just thoughtfully.
Yeah.
Moses quickly bowed to the ground and worshipped, right? God proclaims himself, and what does Moses do? He humbles himself, lays himself down, and he worships. And this is what he says. If now I have found favor, there's that word again, in your sight, O Lord, let my Lord go among us. For we are a stiff-necked people. He acknowledges his own sin, right? He acknowledges his necessity of relying on God's Hesed. We're a stiff-necked people. Pardon our iniquity and our sin, and take us for your inheritance. Moses responds how we all should in light of how God identifies himself. He humbles himself. He exalts God. And he says, you know what, God? I need you to forgive me. And this is one thing I ask. Stay with us. Let us become yours. That's Moses' request. Go with us from here and let us belong to you. Let us be your slaves. Let us be your inheritance. We're not asking, like, I don't care about inheriting the promised land.
Yeah.
I want to be inherited by you. Right? That's what he's asking here. And I think that's a great way to kind of end the study here. Right? Just a thoughtful thing where it's like, how do we respond to God's Hesed? Maybe just in this video, and I know it sounds corny, just go lay down on your face and exalt God, worship him, and just say, God, I'm a sinner. I don't deserve you, but man, do I need you. Walk with me all my days. Let me be yours. and really just focus on trying to adapt this mindset by Moses here, because Moses is just a superstar here. Do you have any final thoughts before we kind of start wrapping this up?
Yeah, I was going to say that he doesn't just identify his Hesed and take it and abuse it after seeing like, wow, this God is so giving and he's so gracious and merciful. Let me just like take it all for myself. Yeah. Whenever he bows down and he worships, he recognizes both the Hesed and the Emet. Mm-hmm. He's like, we are stiff-necked people. I understand, like, we have sin, transgressions, but I'm asking you to forgive it. So he's taking ownership of the things that he's done wrong. And he's like, hey, I recognize this. But he's also realizing that his God is a God of Hesed. Yep. And so it's good to make sure that you understand both of those things, so that way you don't abuse Hesed. Yeah.
And there is a difference between asking for Hesed and abusing it. Yes. Right? Yes. Because he is asking for it here, but he's not abusing it, right? He's not seeking personal gain here. He's just saying, I want to be close to you.
Yeah, it's for God's glory.
Yeah. Absolutely. But yeah, so there is our discussion of Hesed in the book of Exodus. Like I said, we moved a lot slower through here, but we're going to pick up the pace again. And next time, we are going to be moving into Hesed in Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. Yeah. I forget how many times it shows up here, so I don't know if we're going to be able to cover all this at once. I doubt it. Yeah. But yeah, so we're going to go into the rest of the Torah. And then I think after we go finish the Torah, we'll take a break from this series, and we'll go back to my prophet series. And I'll do a few videos there, and we're probably going to be going back and forth, because even though I've taken a lot of weeks off, I actually haven't been able to get as much ahead in that prophet series as I wanted, because honestly, we're probably just going to go through Isaiah, then I'm going to take a big break from that, just so, or maybe I'll go into some of the minor prophets or something, so I'm not doing all the big ones first. I don't know. But yeah, so we're going to go into that next week. Yeah. And thank you so much for sticking with us through this. Really appreciate y'all guys. And be sure to keep a smile on your face. Don't let anybody steal your joy. Once again, if you want access to these slides, you can get those at nowletsbehonest.com/resources. And if you would like to become supporters of us on Patreon, you can do that at patreon.com/David Tate. Do you have anything else you want to say before we finish this up?
Be sure to comment below if you have any insights or anything you thought about the study, anything that you liked. We like reading your comments.
Yes, interact with us, please. Yeah. Appreciate it.
It's a fun time.
All right, well, thank you so much. It's been a fun one. This is probably my favorite one so far, just because, first off, we got to go more in depth, but also very important occurrence.
Absolutely.
But yeah, thank you so much. Love y'all guys, and we will see y'all later. Bye.
Bye.
You read a verse, you sing a hymn, the money's in the plate. Sundays you mark out for him, but even then you show up late. You bought the shirt, you wear the cross, but sin throughout the week. 30 shekels and a noose, you kiss him on the cheek.